Greetings from Wyoming. OSY Guy here, and this is my review of Ubuntu Gnome 16.10. This is a follow-up to an earlier review that I did on Ubuntu Gnome 16.04. I keep saying Ubuntu Gnome, and I want you to realize that this is not a review of stock Ubuntu, which would have the desktop environment that's called Unity. Instead, I'm using the desktop environment called Gnome. It turns out that there are multiple flavors of Ubuntu, or in other words, alternatives to the way your desktop looks and how you get your work done. My preference, after trying various different desktop environments, I've ended up with Gnome as my preferred environment. It seems like when I'm in other environments, I keep trying to make those environments behave more like Gnome. So why not stick with Gnome? So that's what I'm about to do here. Now, the Gnome environment is a very clean interface. Let me just slide to a new blank workspace here for a moment. You see a very clean environment here. There is no dock on the left-hand side. Simply, all you have is the view of the desktop and then the panel across the top. So let me just have you take a look at a few portions of the panel that are at the top. First of all, on the top right-hand corner, if you click your mouse, this gives you access to system settings. You can go to the settings panel here, or you can just make changes to your volume levels and configure your network, or set up your Wi-Fi connection, that kind of thing. That's the hotspot on the right-hand side of the panel. Right in the middle, where the time is, if you click there, you will see the present month view that shows up. And then also, if you have any notifications like software upgrades or anything, they'll show up in this section. And then the most important part to know about is at the left-hand corner at the word activities. When I click on that word, we switch over to what Gnome likes to call the activities overview. Now, when I was in my regular desktop view here, all you could see was the my webcam and my document viewer. But when I access this alternate view, I'm not going to do it by clicking on activities this time. I'm just going to press the logo key. They call it the super key, but I always call it the logo key. You end up seeing that I actually have 4 windows running in this workspace. So I've got the GUVC view, which is my control panel for settings for my webcam, and then I'm recording this whole thing with a program called Simple Screen Recorder, and that's why that's showing up there. Now, in addition to seeing the windows that are open and running in this workspace, you also see the dock showing up. It was a hidden dock before we accessed the overview here, and now your favorite programs will be listed over here. If you run a program that's not in the favorites list, its icon will actually show up over here, and then if you want to make it permanently part of the dock, you just right-click and select Add to Favorites, and then you can add that. If you want to remove anything from this list, you can just right-click and say Remove from Favorites. So these are your favorite programs, accessible just by a click. If you don't see your favorite program there, you can always go to the bottom matrix that's called Show Applications, and that's where you end up seeing all the different programs that are available here. 3 different screenfuls in my case. I'll click on that again, and then just take you over to the right-hand side where we have mini views of the workspaces. Now, Gnome uses a concept that I really like a lot, and that's just simply that once you occupy your first workspace with 1 or more open windows, then a second workspace is available, and it is a clean slate. This avoids the possible problem of having to minimize all the different programs that you might have running in the first workspace, because you can just simply slide over to a second blank workspace like this and open up some more things. So let me get back over to this and then have you take a look at my first workspace again. Now the concept here again is if I go to the second workspace and I open up a program in that workspace, then I have occupied this workspace with one open window. That means that I will end up then with a third workspace that'll show up, and it'll just keep adding as needed. So this dynamic workspace option is quite a nice benefit, and I really like the way that that's designed for GNOME. What do I look for in a distribution? Well, it's just as simple as this. I want easy, fast installation, fast configuration, and I like good availability of software. Now, Ubuntu has a software center that's just simply called software, and it certainly is a very nice, graphically pleasing access to programs. And for instance, I'll just go to the games category. So you see a representative of the featured games in the software center. This is a terrific way to get access to many of the programs that are part of the Ubuntu repositories. When you're in the software center, you can look for an item that's called Synaptic Package Manager. That is an older software center and not nearly as pretty looking, but it does give you sometimes access to more programs and themes and configurations that you can't find in the software center itself. So this Synaptic Package Manager does give you some extra added benefit. There are instances, however, when you're trying to install or trying to get a hold of a piece of software, you can't find it in either the software center or the Synaptic Package Manager. Basically, it's not a part of the official repos. Then you can look for a PPA instead. That's short for Personal Package Archive. And in my particular case here, my favorite way to do screen recording is with a program called Simple Screen Recorder. Not available in the repositories, but if you do a web search for Simple Screen Recorder PPA, you'll find that that'll take you to Martin Bayert's website. I hope I'm saying his name correctly. And he's got instructions there on how to add his personal package archive to your list so that it basically becomes a little mini repository listed along with the rest of your repositories. And it also then has the commands that you need to type into the terminal prompt to update your personal package repository and then install that software. So it's a good way to get a hold of something that might not be in an official repo somewhere. Also, you can find Debian packages. Now, realize that Debian is the parent distro for Ubuntu, and Debian designed a package installation utility for software that is certainly very well supported then in Ubuntu also, and you can identify those packages by the extension .deb at the end of the extension. So, for instance, I use TeamViewer quite frequently. I have a license for that, and so I just go to teamviewer.com and find the teamviewer.deb file and download it. And when you double click it, it shows up in the software center, and there's a big button where you can click that says install. So very easy to add software, even if it's not in the official repositories. As far as installation and upgrade is concerned, The installation of Ubuntu doesn't make a difference whether it's Unity or GNOME or any of the others. The installation of Ubuntu usually takes about 20 minutes, maybe even less. Now I am dealing with solid state hard drives on all of my computers, so I do have faster reactions in there, but just realize that it certainly is very quick and efficient. When I'm installing, I do check mark 2 options that show up. There's an option that says download updates while installing Ubuntu, and another option that says install third-party software. I always check both of those off. After the computer is done and I reboot, then it's always good to update your software. And my preferred way to do that, there is a graphical utility that's called Software Updater, but I actually like to just do it from a terminal prompt. So if I press Control-Alt-T, that's the shortcut that is always there for Ubuntu users to access the terminal. And if I type in sudo apt upgrade and press the enter key, it comes up and says, what's your password? So I type that in. Now I'm completely up to date, so I didn't have any problem there. But the first time that you install Ubuntu, this will be another process that might take 15-20 minutes, something like that. And so make sure to do that, and then you're set to go. Now, if you don't use the graphical software updater utility, you will not get the warning to reboot your computer. And typically when you do a major upgrade like this, you'll end up with some kernel modules that are not going to actually take effect until you reboot. So when you're in a terminal prompt here, you can actually just type in the word reboot and press the enter key, and you will start your computer, restart your computer at that point. When I timed my boot time in all of my computers, again, I do have SSD hard drives, so I get fast boot times regardless. But the boot time is about 10 seconds on all the computers, and it's that is about twice as fast as the Ubuntu Gnome 16.04. That was about 20 seconds, so it was kind of a leisurely boot up as opposed to much faster, more efficient boot time at this point. If you're in a terminal prompt, you can type in gnome-cell --version, and you'll find that your version of GNOME Shell is 3.20, and the kernel version is 4.8. Here are a couple of settings and tweaks that I change shortly after I install Ubuntu. Let's take a look at the settings first. One way to do that is just to right-click on the desktop and just select Settings. And so there's the System Settings panel. I'm just going to show you one thing I do in the keyboard settings. I always like to add a keyboard shortcut for shutting off the computer. So let me remove this one and start from scratch here. So I'm going to put in a shutdown command that's a keyboard-based command. So I'm going to click on the plus sign and type in a description, shut down, and then the command will actually be power off. And I click the add button, and then the only thing I have left to do is to click on the word disabled, and then I can hold down a new key combination, and I like to do Control-Alt-End, and so I have now assigned a keyboard shortcut. With that change done, I no longer have to click on the top right hand corner and click on the power off button here. I can just simply press Control-Alt-End on my keyboard, and it will execute a shutdown. So I really like that capability, and that is very well implemented in the GNOME side of things. One more thing that I want to point out, and that's in the printers utility. I had some trouble with the printer utility, and it turned out to be my problem and not the printer utility problem itself. But Here's how it used to work. Back over in Ubuntu Gnome 16.04, I would open up the printer's module, I'd click on the plus sign, and my printer would show up like this. So it's an HP NV printer. I'd click on add, and I was done. In 16.10, I did exactly that, and when I would send a print job to it, it would get lost and would lock up and would just completely drive me crazy. And I thought it was a flaw with Ubuntu 16.10. I didn't explore it any further, except that I tried to find bug reports. Couldn't find anything. It was really upsetting, and so in the meantime, I moved back to 16.04, and then I was trying out an Arch derivative called Antergos, and I was installing a printer then, and I ran across the exact same problem that I couldn't print just by the way I had done it in the past. And so my discovery was that I just needed to learn a little bit different way to do this. Now in Ubuntu, regular Ubuntu 16.10, when you do this, add a new printer, there is a branch that is actually labeled network printer, and it does an auto discover and finds your network printer. Now this NV printer is a wireless printer on my network, but the auto discover is not set up in the GNOME version of the printer utility. So it's an easy fix. You just simply type in your IP address for your printer, and then just wait for a few moments, and then you'll see it pop up in this section. So here's the HP NV, and there's the address for it. And when you click add, that is effective. That works just fine. So you can't be quite as lazy as you were in the past. In the newer version of GNOME here, the printer utility is not quite as convenient as it used to be, but it still is effective. Now I'd like to show you the GNOME Tweak tool, just titled Tweak. And this actually gives you some settings options that are not quite available right inside of the system settings. The settings panel sometimes doesn't have quite as much detail as you would like. It's kind of a Spartan panel in some regards, and so you will find that there are some other settings tweaks that you can do from the Tweak panel instead. Now this one is categorized down the left-hand side here, so we're looking at appearance, and of course this is where you can change to a different desktop theme if you have one installed. I only have the default one at this point, so nothing listed there besides high contrast. But I have installed quite a few different icon themes, and so I've got this full list to choose from here. And I've also installed the Breeze cursor theme, and so I have that available, as well as the Adwaita theme that is already there. In the desktop section, just want you to be aware of this. When you're in the settings panel and you choose a particular desktop background, that doesn't give you some options that I had been kind of used to having available, and that was that if you had a screen that was the photo was a different form factor from your 1920 by 1080 resolution, then sometimes it wouldn't be centered correctly, or it just wouldn't draw correctly. And I didn't realize that in the Tweak panel here, you have the ability to change your background from zoom to centered, and to scaled and spanned and stretched and wallpaper, and I'll just take it back to zoom again. And you can do those same settings to your background for your lock screen as well. So these are settings that are not available in system settings, but they are available here from the Tweak tool. You can add all kinds of extensions. Now, just about every version of, whether it's Ubuntu Gnome or it's Fedora Gnome or any others, they will have some standard extensions that are already in place in here. So, for instance, this applications menu, you don't have the option to remove it. It was a built-in extension, but you can add extensions, and so down at the bottom of the list, there is a link that says "Get More Extensions." That will open up the Firefox, and it will be going specifically to extensions.gnome.org. And the first time you go here, Firefox will inform you that it needs to allow this website to have some information from your computer, and so you need to select on the right hand portion of the screen, allow, and then on the left hand side it says allow and remember. Make sure to do those two things, and then refresh your connection to extensions.gnome.org, and then you will be seeing a list of the extensions that apply to your version of GNOME. Now, just to be clear on this, this is GNOME Shell 3.20. When I'm running Fedora, that is running 3.22, so it's a different version of GNOME, a later version of GNOME, and as later versions of GNOME come out, they are less compatible with these extensions, and so that listing there in 3.22 will show, it shows like 19 pages of extensions as opposed to 27 pages. So that's kind of the downside to when you change to a new version of GNOME. Sometimes your favorite extension is, at least for a while, is not available, so you may have to be patient about that. But these extensions certainly, you can add a number of extensions that can be quite valuable. I'll just show you some of mine that are up here on the top. There's a screen lock, or I should say a numlock extension that I have added in that allows me to lock the numlock in place so that I don't have to press the numlock key to unlock my keypad on the right side of my keyboard. I also have a ping indicator extension right here that if I show you what that looks like, I have this pointed to one of the Google DNS servers, and this pings that server once every 10 seconds, and that's a really good utility to have in place. I will always put that in place on my laptops, because when I'm connecting to a customer's network, I can certainly identify very quickly if this number is like showing 600 or something like that, then we definitely don't have a healthy connection to the internet. So that's a nice utility to have. I also have this right here, which is it's a screenshot utility that's just available by clicking on the panel here, and then I can select the area that I want to make a screenshot to, and so on. And that I also do have the weather extension showing right here that you can configure for your area as well. So those are the extensions. That's the list of extensions that you can modify, remove, add, and so forth. In the fonts section here, I will make a change sometimes, especially on a laptop that has pretty high resolution, and as a result gives you a pretty small screen to work with. You can change your scaling factor here. I'll just change it to 1.5, and then you can see that all of the resulting menus and everything got larger. So this scaling factor in the fonts section is a really good thing to do. I'll take it back to 0 there, and then it gets a little bit, it behaves a little bit funny, so I'll close that and open it back up again. And we'll go beyond the fonts. We'll go to keyboard and mouse. I make one change here, and that's just to simply turn off the middle click paste because I don't use that in my for my mouse. In the power setting, I usually make no change in there. Top bar, I will make a change. By default, this will only display the time and not the date, and so I always put a check mark in the show date so that I can get that result up there. And I also put a check mark in the show week numbers, which then show up in the calendar here so that I can see what week that I'm dealing with. So I can see it's the 10th week, and on my even weeks, I need to put out my recycle bin. So it's an easy way to figure that out there. Typing, I don't make any changes there. I do make one change here. Let me change it back again. The attached modal dialogues by default is set to on. Now, let me just run my scanner for a moment. Here's my simple scan utility. Typically, if I'm scanning a page, maybe it's a credit card receipt, I will name that credit card receipt by its date and the company that charged the receipt and how much that receipt was. And so I will name the receipt by hitting the save button here, and then I will want to take a look at the scan to make the changes. Now this, we have the modal dialog set to on here, and so if I try to click and drag this dialog box, you see that it actually holds on to, I can't move the dialog box without moving the entire window. So let me just go back and change the attached modal dialogues to off, and then I will say save, and now I can click and drag. You see I can move this and get it out of the way so that I can take a look at the page here and title my document in a way that'll make the most sense to me. So that is the change that I make on attached modal dialogues. Now I want to address a particular problem and the fix that I would propose for, and I've already talked about the printer problem previously. That my fix, quote unquote, is actually just type in the IP address of your printer when you're setting it up, and you'll be fine. So that's already taken care of there. But this this other error report problem is what I want to address next. Here was the problem. I would maybe once a session or once every other session, I would have a couple of error messages that would pop up at various times. One of them would indicate that the Plymouth module crashed, and then another one might pop up and say Gnome Shell had a crash, and I would try to research and try to figure out, was there a problem, and it got to be pretty nebulous on trying to even figure out if there was anything I needed to worry about. I couldn't find any problems with my session. It was running fine. All capabilities were running normal, and so these error messages that were popping up were actually annoyances rather than something that I needed to be concerned with. So now, certainly the first step, if you're seeing error messages, the first step would always be to upgrade and update your operating system and make sure that that's not the issue. But if you've done that and then you're still being presented with these errors, then the solution that I'm using is simply to shut off the error reporting feature. Now I'm going to be typing in sudo nano and then etc default app port. There's a configuration file called app port that we want to make a change to. So here we go. Sudo nano. That's a text editor that runs inside your terminal, and it's a clean editor. Does a nice job. So not something to be afraid of at all. etc default. Whoops. Interesting. And app port. Now As I hit the enter key, it says, okay, what's your password? So I type that in, and now I'm seeing the text file displaying from inside my terminal. Now the terminal is something that you have to use your arrow keys to move around, since this is not a graphical text editor like Get would be. You just have to use your arrow keys to get around. So now this is showing how I changed this. This enabled originally was the number 1, and I changed it to 0 so I would turn off the app port. So I'm just going to change it back to its original configuration so you can see the process here. Type in 1 for enabled, and down at the bottom they give you these various shortcut keys. They don't make it really clear, but the caret key that's showing up is actually indicating that you need to hold down the control key and then the X key. So we need to exit with control X. So I'm going to press control X, and this pops up and says, would you like to save this, yes or no? So I type in Y for yes, and then it suggests, would you like to write to the app port file, and I just press enter, and then that is accomplished. Now, since I would like to actually turn off this app port, we'll go back in and change it to the way I would like it. So I will repeat my previous command with an up arrow, and then press enter, and then I'll arrow through here till I get to enabled equals 1, and we'll delete that and type in 0 instead. I'll press control X to exit the editor, and then it says, do you want to save this? I press yes, and then I press enter to modify that file, and I'm done. I'd like to show you a few tweaks that I do from inside the editor that's called dconf. I believe that probably is short for desktop configuration, but the dconf editor has got more finely tuned settings than are available either in settings or in the tweak tool that I've shown you previously. So let me show you that. It's just simply called dconf. So we can type in dconf and hit the enter key, and we're there. Put that down at the bottom. Now I'm going to show you the first two tweaks I'll show you is first of all the cursor size, which I've noticed in GNOME you don't really have any setting that you can change. The mouse configuration portion of the settings panel doesn't have any particular options, and nothing like what you might find, for instance, in Ubuntu Mate, which does have some more finely tuned things that you can do to both the keyboard and the mouse. So I'm going to show you how you can change the cursor size, especially for maybe for a laptop that has really high resolution, so everything is very small and you can hardly see the cursor. Here's how you can do it. In the dconf editor, we're going to go into the group that's called org, and then we're going to find the category GNOME, and then we're going to find desktop and then interface. So desktop and interface. Right here is cursor size, and it shows that it has a default of 24. Can't make any change to it unless you turn off the default value. So I will click the on switch to make it slide to off, and we'll change the 24 value to 48, and select apply, and you now see that we get the resulting much larger cursor. So that's one tweak that you can do. Now let me just go back to the normal setting here. I'll just turn the use default value back to on and say apply, and then that goes to the size 24. The next tweak that I want to show you is this one that I call recursive search in Nautilus, and that needs a little bit of explanation, but let me go find that and switch it back to the default view, and then I'll show you the result on that. So we need to be in org again, and then we're going to Gnome and then Nautilus. And then inside there, we're looking for preferences. Here's this category right here, or this description that says, enable interactive search. Now the default setting for that is that it is on, or it is true, in other words. So I'll change it over to the default setting so that you can see the disadvantage that you get from this. I'll open up a Nautilus screen, my file manager, and I would like to look for, I've got a file, I think it's actually inside a Dropbox. It's called Ubuntu Notes. So I'm going to type in Ubuntu, and you see what happens here is at the bottom of the screen it captured what I was typing and did not search inside any of the folders. It's only going to look on this present view. So as an example, if I start to type in documents, then it highlights the documents folder, but Ubuntu Notes doesn't respond at all. If I want to actually search for that Ubuntu Notes file, I have to click on the search button up here and then begin typing in Ubuntu Notes, and then I can find it. That's okay, except that I believe that I should be able to just start typing without having to click on the search button tool. So let me show you what happens when we take the default setting here, enable interactive search as being true. We'll turn off the default value and then select false, and then apply. Now if I go to this screen, I'm not going to click on the search button, I'm just going to start typing. You see what happens? It was able to search within all of the folders to find anything that was titled Ubuntu Notes. So that's my preference. The preference is to turn off enable interactive search, which means that you are then using what's called a recursive search. Now this is an Ubuntu setting. If I took you to a Fedora installation and we opened up the dconf editor, went into the Nautilus preferences, you would not even find enable interactive search as an option. It's just not there. So the default in other versions of GNOME is that you're always going to do a recursive search, which is, to me, the better way to do the search. So I don't know why Ubuntu decided to do this, except that the enable interactive search is also the setting inside of Unity as well. It used to, in 16.04 GNOME, this enable interactive search was false, so it was actually turned off by default. But in 16.10 they decided to have it turned back on again, so my choice is to go in here and get that back over to false so that we can have a recursive search. And I do make one setting change here, that this recursive search that's down here is always set to be local only, and I always switch it to be always. I just find that that's the better setting. One of the GNOME extensions that I would always look for every time I would set up a new version of Ubuntu Gnome, I would look for an extension called Put Windows. That extension, it turns out, is a redundant extension because there are already pre-configured keyboard shortcuts to move windows around. So I'd like to show you that, and then I'll talk about that a little bit more as well. I'm going to open up the settings panel here, and it shows up just like that, and I'm going to move it without clicking and dragging on the title bar. Just use a keyboard shortcut, and then we'll open up Tweak and put it into the right hand top corner, and then I'll open up a terminal, put it into the bottom left corner. Those pre-configured shortcuts have been around, and within not just Ubuntu Gnome, but also in Unity and in Mate. Those keyboard shortcuts are placed, and you can find them in the dconf editor, but they are the Control and Alt keys, and then a number on your keypad. And they are oriented by the position of the number on the keypad. So Control Alt 7 put this window in the top left corner, and then I'll hold down the Control Alt keys here and just press the other corner numbers like 9, 3, and 1, and then back to 7 again. Now I'm going to place it back in the center with the 5 key. Now those shortcuts were already in place, but not the move to the center shortcut, and they are in place for Ubuntu, but they are not in place in other distributions. And I'm talking about this so that you can realize that if you would like this capability and you're not in Ubuntu Gnome, you can still open up the dconf editor and spend about 10 minutes and put in these keyboard shortcuts that you would like to use yourself. So let me open up the dconf editor, and we'll put it in the bottom right corner there, and we're going to take a look at the location for this section of the dconf editor. So we need to go to org, gnome, and then desktop, and then WM for window manager, and then finally key bindings. In this section you will find that there are some spots here where you can configure the movement of those windows to various positions on the screen. Move to center is not configured by default, so I'm going to actually switch this back over to its default setting, which is that there is no keyboard shortcut for moving to center. Now what we need to do is use the syntax that I'm showing over here. So we need to type in a command that is going to start with a single quotation mark and smaller than and greater than signs that will where you'll place the command key in between those signs, and need to put in the double set of brackets since we're going to use both Control and Alt. And then finally you type in KP underscore to identify which number 5 you're talking about. If you want to just use the main keyboard number 5, you would do it without the KP underscore. But if you are referencing the number that is on the keypad, then you'll have to have KP underscore in there. So I'm going to click on Move to Center, and I'm going to change the default value from on to off so that we can actually access in here. And I'll type in our infrastructure first, so I'll do a single quote, smaller than, greater than, smaller than, greater than, and a single quote. Now I'll go back and place between the angle brackets CTRL, and then in the next set of brackets I'll place Alt, and then I'm going to type in KP underscore and then the number 5. Now actually I'm going to place another keyboard shortcut here for the number 5 that is on the main keyboard as well. So I'm going to go after the quote there, and I'm going to type in another I'm going to type in a comma and then another quote, and we'll put in the brackets here again, so smaller than, greater than, smaller than, greater than, and then closing quote, and then we'll do CTRL Alt and just the number 5 like that. Now when I say apply here, that has activated that shortcut. So if I hold down Control Alt 5, I go to the center of the screen. If I do Control Alt 3, I go back down to the bottom, and so forth. Now I can press Control-Alt-5 on my main keyboard and get the same result because I put in that shortcut as well. Now I have to make a little bit of an explanation here. That the first time I did this, I typed it incorrectly and it did not work simply because there were two other commands that that were using the Control-Alt-5 shortcut, and that was the maximize right here. If you can see this section, this is the default. And right here it says primary alt keypad 5. Primary is just simply another way to say the abbreviation that I was using of CTRL. So primary is another possibility, but I had to actually change this default value to off so that I could then delete this keyboard shortcut. They had a total of 3 shortcuts that could be used here in this case, and so I had to eliminate one of those, and that was in the maximize. There's also another one a bit farther down that's called toggle maximized. Same thing, I had to take out the Control-Alt keypad 5 in there too, because otherwise it would maximize the screen instead of moving to the center. So that's the approach that I use, and my discovery was that when you're in other distributions that are using GNOME, for instance, I've tried it with Antergos and Manjaro, and also with Fedora. These pre-configured keyboard shortcuts don't exist in those distributions, but you can open up the dconf editor and locate each of the categories and just take some time and put in these commands that you'd like to use yourself, and you can configure any version of GNOME that's out there to be able to accept these shortcuts. So it's just a nice extra tweak that you can do, and wanted to have you see how that worked. That's my review of Ubuntu Gnome 16.10. Hopefully you got some good information and maybe some good tips and tricks. I would like to let you know of a couple of future videos that I'm wanting to put out. One on Korora, which I call the Lazy Guy's Fedora. And I also want to put out a pretty short video, I hope, on recovering files from a crashed Windows computer using Ubuntu. So look forward to those in the future, and thanks for watching.